Welcome to another Forge Dev Den. So there are quite a number of new cool stuff going on. Uh, so that's why this is the second for the month of October already. So my name is Ayan, a developer advocate from Atlassian, and I will be your moderator for today. Just a quick recap. In our previous Dev Den, we talked about integrating external services with your Forge apps through Forge Remote. So if you were not able to dial in last month, don't worry. The recording is already uploaded to Atlassian Developers YouTube channel. So before I forget, I'm gonna paste that link in the chat. Hang on. Gonna send it to everyone. So you can watch all the recorded sessions in there. Okay. So for today's session, today's session is going to be pretty exciting. We have Varun with us to talk about Forge SQL as it enters the early access program and show us a live demo on how to use it. Towards the end, apart from the coding demo, Varun will also showcase how to view different metrics to better understand your app's DB interactions. I know everyone's excited, but before I hand over the virtual microphone to Varun, let's go through some house rules first. One, unless asking or answering questions, please keep your microphones on mute. Two, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat or ask them live during the Q&A session at the end. The session is set to 1 hour, so in the unfortunate event that we weren't able to answer all of the questions, please raise them in the developer community forums. I'll drop the link now. Here you go. Okay, lastly, I'd like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and will be shared in the Atlassian Developers YouTube channel, as I mentioned, roughly a week from now. So this way, in case anyone wants to rewatch some parts of the session as reference, then you will be able to do so. This will also help the developers who weren't able to dial in today. So that said, I believe we are recording. Oh, I'm gonna press the magic record button as soon as I find it. It always gets tricky. Yep, I hit the record button now. Double checking. I think that's good. Okay, with a quick intro and house rules done, I'll hand you over to Varun to kick off today's session. So Varun, take it away.
Hey everyone, welcome to Forge Dev Den. My name is Varun. Let me start sharing my screen first before. All right, could you please confirm if my screen is visible? You can see a big blue blob there. All right, excellent. Hi. My name's Varun. I've been in Atlassian for a little over 5 years, and over the past couple of years, I've been working on Forge. Most recently, I've been looking at Forge storage, and I'm quite excited to bring some advancements that we've made in increasing the number of storage offerings that Forge is going to provide over the next 12 to 18 months. Um, I'm currently working on Forge SQL. The agenda for today's session is a general overview of what SQL, Forge SQL specifically is. Now, we'll go through how we have designed it, explain a few constraints, the demo, what's coming after the demo, and some question and answers from your side. So I think the slides are pretty light. I'm happy to sort of take as many questions as possible. And in the case I'm not able to answer any of the questions in the future, I have a few colleagues of mine in the channel as well. So please feel free to interact with them. All right. So I've been fascinated with SQL ever since this came out, right? And maybe even a little before. But SQL as an offering it's ironically one of the first things that we learn to write code with when we are sort of having some level of interaction with the database. The first thing that comes to mind is SQL. Unfortunately, it's also a fairly difficult sort of database solution to scale and host in a multi-tenant manner, right? Which is why, and for the right reasons, NoSQL is popular in the marketplace. There's Mongo, our own key value store that we have with Forge is also it's a fairly scalable solution that we are building there as well. But SQL specifically has a few advantages in terms of defining the structure of the data that you want, defining some level of relations. Um, I'm sorry, is there someone we need to keep on mute, or is that my background noise?
I muted
Excellent, thank you.
that one already.
Yeah, so SQL offers a lot of benefits to some partners in some apps, right? There are modeling that you can do. You can take NoSQL a long way, but there are cases where SQL makes certain sense for certain applications. And as Forge grows, we want to support a wide variety of storage solutions, and SQL is one of the options that we are looking at right now. Now, when we started looking at Forge SQL, we looked at the market, we looked at what other solutions which are there right now, and we settled on a few principles that we want, which is we want a scalable solution that we can operate. Right. So it needs to be horizontally scalable. It needs to support a fair amount of connections. We should not be able to hit top headrooms in terms of performance and throughput at low volumes, because Forge has a very interesting database model where we foresee a lot of small databases around, and with a small chunk of significantly large databases based on how our partners apps are used. So multi-tenancy is key because we need to pack as many databases as possible, but at the same time, we need the ability to offer strong tenant isolation, which means that from a customer's point of view, it means that when a Forge app is installed on a customer's workspace, we want the isolation guarantees that a Forge app should only be able to see that particular its own database on that customer and should not be able to mix data inadvertently or otherwise. Right, and same for other apps on the installation base as well. And we also wanted to provide observability as a first class concept. So we wanted to make sure that once you go to multi-tenant databases and developers don't have the ability to connect to a database directly, we need to make sure you have enough information that we can surface that could help you debug problems or look at any faulty queries that may be there, or even potentially look at solutions and how you can improve the performance of your queries. Right. The design of Forge is somewhat like this. It's highly illustrative, but the model that we've chosen is every Forge app installation will get a database of its own. Right? What this means is, if you look at, let's say you have Acme Jira as a workspace that we have, a workspace or sites. I use workspace to refer to the product instance on a site, but let's say Acme Jira, Acme Bitbucket, even if the same Forge app is installed on both these different workspaces, the database is unique, which means that you get some interesting characteristics with this. You get isolation in terms of database boundaries, but you also sort of potentially get backup and restore capabilities, which you wouldn't do in a pure multi-tenant database if you're sharing data with everyone else. So, and this gives strong level of isolation in terms of customer guarantees and security, which we prefer. And the same thing if Acme Jira has two Forge apps, both get their own different databases. Um, Now, Forge apps currently, which are based on Lambda, even if we go to other compute offerings in the future, that's fine. But fundamentally, what we have right now is we expose a HTTP-based communication through the front door here, but eventually we end up talking the database protocol on the other side. So we end up multiplexing HTTP over MySQL in this case, right? Now, reiterating the design principle, one installation, one database is something we felt strongly we should offer. So that's what we're trying out right now. We have a HTTP API, and that sort of forces us to give some interesting semantics. The HTTP API that you can access, it's similar to what a lot of other vendors do in the marketplace right now, but the HTTP API fundamentally has single atomic SQL statements. You cannot chain statements together. For example, you'll only be able to, one HTTP request that you fired will only be able to have a single SQL statement. Transactionality is bound to that single statement as well. And as part of our design principles, we have rate limits based on the amount of time you actually spend in the database. So we want to make sure we don't penalize apps for being using the database much, but we also want to balance a stable performance guarantee that we want to provide, where your app should not suffer if there's one more app which is being a noisy neighbor, right? So we want to guarantee a base amount of throughput with very little overhead that our own services adds on top. We can talk a bit more later on how we plan to achieve it and what our limitations are. But fundamentally, right now, you are given X number of seconds within a 60-minute window to execute your databases. You will be rate limited if you go beyond that. And we believe that number is fairly generous based on our usage right now. Um, because this is a multi-tenant database that we are hosting, and it is Forge's SQL design, and SQL design at our scale is actually a fairly novel problem to solve in the industry. And we have applied a few constraints. One of the key constraints that we have is we have applied read timeout limits and memory quota per query. So what that means is if you're having a query that says sleep 200 seconds, right? We terminate that at currently at 5 seconds right now. We don't tolerate extremely long running queries. We also limit the amount of data a query can pull. So if you're trying to do a few joins and you're trying to pull lots of data, we have like a fairly generous headroom there, but there are memory quota limits that we put in place as well. We are also heavily recommending using ANSI SQL as a syntax. The reason is we don't want to be tied into a specific technology. Like we don't want apps to write SQL statements that try to look at something specific that MySQL offers in this case. Because in the future, if we want to offer a different database, if you want to offer SQL, if you want to back SQL with a different SQL engine, we won't be able to do that if our partners can't write code in a way that can be transferred from one SQL engine to another, right? So we heavily recommend using ANSI SQL syntax. Nothing which is outside, nothing which is database specific here. So we are looking at, we don't support GIS types, we don't support a bunch of other things that deviate a bit from the ANSI SQL syntax. Um, the One of the key traits of database technologies which are horizontally scalable like this is to get some flexibility on the storage engine that databases have. We don't support foreign keys as much. So which means that it's experimental, it's enabled in our EAP right now, but I'd really want to encourage building relations, but not actually adding constraints in the database. And we can talk a bit more on what that looks like. Um, and like I said originally, transactions here are atomic commit single statement per query. You won't be able to start we will be able to every HTTP query that you sort of execute will have a single line statement in there, right? Um, all right, so a demo of a solution that we have. I'll show you what the book lending solution example that we have, and I can take you through the code as well after this. As always, like if you have questions, please ask on the chat, and I'll get to it when I can view the chat window. Right. All right, so I will show you, I'm going to refresh this page. This is my Confluence page. I've created a page where I've added a Confluence macro. I'll take you through the code of what the macro looks like in some time. But um, um, let's sort of um, build on the sample app that we have. So it's a standard book sharing app. And classroom.com. So we created, so now what's actually happening is it's gone and created the app in the SQL database that we have in the background. So what we have is number. So I'm going to add more, uh, add a few books while I can show you what that looks like. Book was created successfully. And I want to go and borrow that book today, and I return it sometime. And so, as you can see, there are some types. There are some date types here. There's some users, which are basically user IDs, which are integers in the background that we have. And we created a loan. And then if you see this, you are this was the test user that I created before, and this is me here, right? And you can even do a search. Search uses I like, which is which is what you see now. It shows you this here, right? So sample app, everything's using SQL in the background, right? I want to talk to you about how this is built, and I want to show you developer console after that, right? I'm going to open Visual Studio Code right now. And there are changes that you'll expect once we productionalize this offering, but essentially what we have is similar. What you see here is pretty similar um, to what we will end up going forward in preview stages as well, right? So um, provisioning that we do right now in terms of whenever a Forge app is installed or deployed, um, unlike our key value store offerings, the Forge app requires a database to be provisioned, right? And the way the database is provisioned, we use our lifecycle hooks. Lifecycle hooks are asynchronously called hooks that are called when an app is installed or an app is upgraded. And what happens here is it calls a function called provision schema. And provision schema goes here to index.provision schema. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Is Visual Studio having a moment? Yes, okay, it is. So I'm going to go to my resolver and provision. Right. So provision schema right now does two things. It calls create schema. Create schema is when the SDK we go and call, if you notice here, we use the Forge SDK. I can talk a bit more about what the SDK looks like, how we want to evolve it. But fundamentally, there's a provision method here. It's experimental right now because we're in EAP. And once we have the approach finalized, the method signatures and everything should roughly align with what we have. So provision schema goes and creates a database if it does not exist. Once you create a database, we want you to run your schema migrations. Now, schema migrations right now, it looks like this, right? Now, if you look at this one, schema migration is something that we have called a migration runner. Now, migration runner is similar if you've used Flyway, if you've used Active Record, if you've used a bunch of other solutions. We are trying to model it in a similar way. But what we do here is we have a version which is a string right now, and a SQL script that goes with it, right? So we have like in version 1, I create users. Version 2, I create books. Version 3, I create loans. Version 4, I add an index. Version 5, I alter the user table that we have. And the queries are fairly simple. Now, create table if not exists. If you notice, I use if not exists everywhere because we try to make sure that even though the migration SDK that we have is fundamentally tries to protect you from not running the same migration over and over again, we want to be sure that the queries are idempotent as much as possible. So if you look at the statement here, you have int primary key, varchar, timestamp types. Default is current timestamp, which in MySQL is basically defaults to now. We have date types here. And similar in terms of a loans table, you notice no foreign keys, but they're actually relations that we have. And indexes that we create, standard MySQL indexes, alter table, add column if it does not exist with default as well. So standard SQL syntax being accepted. We do not um, add any limitations into what sort of DDL scripts that you can create here, right? What the migration SDK does is it sort of calls migration runner.run. And the run method basically looks at we have a table called migrations that we create when we provision the database view. And we sort of add all the checkpoints and when the last migration was run. So if a migration was run, we don't run it again. And if all the 5 migrations are run, we won't run it again, right? So it sort of goes in that order as well. So this is list item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we sort of go in that order when we run the migrations. Fairly simple. There's a lot of scope for improvement in terms of what we can do here. And as always, we'd love to get some feedback from you, and then we can sort of um, talk about how you can share that with us, right? So at this stage, your app now has a SQL database. It has the table structure that you've created, which is awesome. And you want to go and look at how you can query the database, so to speak, right? So what we do is I'll show you two examples of what we have. One of them is what this app is using, and another one is that using in ORM, which is highly experimental right now. But I just wanted to show you what we can do with this, right? So if you look at this borrow book implementation, right? Standard, I won't go into the front end aspects as much because it's standard macro that we have built. But if you look at the borrow book right now, it looks a little like this. The SDK is again sort of it's modeled to sort of encourage developers to use prepared statements and binding parameters so that obviously the XKCD that you saw in front, it shouldn't happen if you as long as we sanitize our inputs fundamentally. So we sort of come here and say, hey, use this borrow book. The borrow book loan looks like this, which is a lot of positional parameters right now, which MySQL supports. And we bind the parameters to what we have, and then we execute it. The response time on execute, it gives us a promise API response. We don't have to go too much into detail on that. But fundamentally, the error object is something that we are pretty happy with, which is fundamentally we get error codes, which will tell you what type of error happened, whether the SQL execution was an error, which means that the statement that you have defined is incorrect, or there are a couple of other error types that we respond to as well. Even invalid SQL, whether the query timed out, or in EAP if your app is not enabled to use SQL. Get loans is the same thing. It's sort of like we have a new other method called execute raw. If you're not using prepared statements, we just give you the ability to write this SQL in one go, which is uh, get joins with loan, which is here, which sort of like it does a couple of inner joins here, which looks like this, right? Standard SQL, nothing too fancy altogether. All of this code is there in a public repository as well. We're going to share those links with you so you can look at how we have built this, right? Now you build it, you deploy the app, and then you come into developer console, right? So in developer console, what you see here is for an app, and this is my app, right? That I have right now. SQL is an EAP service. Um, this is the site that I have. It tells you how many of my invocations I've had. It tells you we are starting off with observability, providing observability that we have right now. We have a bunch of latency numbers that we are querying for right now. So we currently measure P50, P95, and P99. And we also have app logs where you can if I go into development standard, if I can filter by the installation that I have, and all the logs that you saw earlier, which said that create how the databases are created, and how the migrations are being run for the first time, the checkpoints and everything are being shown here, right? So this is we have logs which Forge always had. We have metrics here as well. We're going to enhance these metrics a lot more going forward. So that you see latency buckets, you see a bit more of filtering by the type of query that you're firing, whether you'll be able to sort of filter by select, create, update, delete, DML, DDL, DQL sort of filters, which will help you reason about how the performance of your app is, right? And the other thing which I wanted to show you before I stop was um, where was my yeah. So if you look at the like query that you have there, the like query looks a little like this. We use standard I like parameters with positional parameters as well. And for case insensitive search, what we have is search query that we have twice, right? Because we look at the query looks at the title or the author name. So which is why we sort of execute a query like this, right? Um, what we also have, while you're all here, I'd love to, and we are doing good on time. There's a bunch of experiments that we are doing through the course of our EAP. And some of the things that we are doing, and this is we're not sort of making any changes on the backend side to do it, but something that you can do as well right now. If you are sort of interested in this is there is an ORM in the TypeScript which is fairly popular called Drizzle. This is not an endorsement of Drizzle. I just sort of took Drizzle to sort of use it. You can try to use other ORMs with Forge. Forge as a platform does not have an opinion if you use an ORM or if you use the SDK directly. Right. So if you look at some of the queries that we have with this, you are able to fire queries like this, db.insert, right? And the values is new loan that you pass in. You're able to sort of do the inner join query that you saw. It looks like this now. db.select, inner join, inner join. You can have pagination and limits and everything else in there, right? How this is defined is actually pretty cool. Is sort of we go and we define the schema like this. We sort of define a user table, we define a books table, we define relations, and we define a bunch of things here which are identical to what you saw in the schema migrations being defined fundamentally. And there are no foreign keys, but there are relations that we've defined, and we want to see how that goes. And in things like loan interactor or even say user interactor, the queries are really simple, db.select from users, right? So we're building the solution in a way that it makes it possible to plug some of these ORMs. We obviously don't know what sort of ORMs you all would prefer or whether you'd not prefer an ORM at all. So some of this feedback would help us shape the product, right? Um, so I am going to pause there, go back to my slide, and quickly talk about what we just saw. You were able to see how you could sort of use the SQL SDK to build an app. The SDK is pretty simple. It only has 2, 3 methods. Standard Forge dev loop. There's nothing new or different that we are doing. Provisioning and migration scripts are asynchronous, and we showed you how you can do it. Performance and latency is we're building observability from the get-go here to make sure developers understand what the performance and everything of the app that they're seeing right now. So all of this is available for our EAP participants, and we are running a closed EAP now, and we have plans of opening up the EAP later in the year as well. Right. Um, I'm going to pause for questions. Is there anything you would like me to um, answer? I've not taken a look at the Zoom chat till now, sorry.
Yeah, we do have a number of questions, but it pertains to the earlier topics. Are you fine with answering them now, or?
Sure. We can do that because, or I can even go through what we are doing eventually and then come back and answer all the questions one by one. In case
Yep.
someone would answer some of the questions that you have there. Um,
Yeah, maybe that's a good. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the next sort of foreseeable future, in the what we want to do is we want to support provisioning flows, which is both synchronous and asynchronous in some use cases, right? So that a database is provisioned with an installation. Um, like all Fort storage offerings, what our customers are asking for is data resident apps. So any storage offering that we build will have to be data resident, and we're focusing on that. We are focusing a lot on performance tuning and improvements, right? Currently the cluster is located in US. So if your database is created if your site is created in a different region, you will see some additional latency. That won't be the case when we have clusters all over the world where our products are. There's also level of noisy neighbor and sort of performance snapshot isolation that we are undertaking as well to make sure that apps receive the optimal performance as long as you're not being rate limited based on fair use. Observability is something we want to focus on. We understand that Connect app developers, especially, may have been used to running their own databases. So you will be losing a bit of your direct database connectivity here, but we hope to fill that void by sort of making sure all the questions that you want answered are data points that we capture. Right. So that's something which we are keen on sort of working on and completing as well. Um, Questions? Yes.
Sorry, was on mute. Yeah, okay, so we have a little over 10 questions here. We can go through them one by one. So the first one is, regarding data retention. So the question is, but is data retention still there? And data will be unaffected by app reinstallation, or will the data be lost?
So I just want to take a moment here to say that even I know there was e- currently on Forge, when an app is reinstalled, the data is not lost, right? We just need to relink the data. And what will happen is storage will follow a similar model where uh, data retention is a guarantee. You will get data retention. We are also publishing a page soon on that on how we do data retention in Forge, just sort of like to make sure we address some of the concerns that you may have. But Forge storage will also sort of have a similar pattern. Forge SQL will have a similar pattern where when an app is uninstalled for a period of time, the database would still be retained. It may not be accessible, but if an app is reinstalled within a certain period of time, you'll be able to relink the database.
Okay. Did that answer the question, Andy? I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Moving on to the next, it's a two-part question about storage limits. So the first one is what storage limitations are there in terms of size? I know we do have a, a page for quotas and limits, but for the SQL, I don't think we have anything mentioned about storage limitations.
Yeah,
And then the
yeah.
second, oh, yeah, you
Sorry.
can answer that one, and then I'll follow up with the next one.
Thank you. Sorry for that. The service right now is in EAP, and we do not have the same limitations as key value store right now in terms of the 256 KB limits that we have on a per row. We are thinking of maybe having the number of rows being limited, or we are thinking of number of connections that you can, not sorry, not connections, the number of um, the time that we spend in the database are more interesting factors for us a SQL database than the actual row size itself, right? We do not have limitations as yet, but we'd love to understand from you as to what your current workloads are so that we can build sensible limits that make sense for your apps, right? But we are roughly thinking most in terms of the amount of time limits that we can impose in terms of, the rolling window that I just sort of explained in terms of the database execution time is what we care a lot about. And we care a lot about making stable performance across the entire app installation cohort. So
Um,
that is not to say there are no limitations. There will be limitations which are different than what we have with our key value store offering.
okay, I hope that clarifies the question, Sasha. The follow-up question for that one is the storage limitation gonna be shared with Forge storage?
When you say shared, I'm not sure what it means. Um,
Um, Andy, are you still in the call? Maybe you can clarify that one. My understanding is that if there is such a thing as storage limitation, which we currently do not have, is it gonna share that upper bound limit with Forge storage? But Andy, maybe you can clarify better.
I 500 MB per installation that you mentioned, Andy. Yeah. We do not have any um, size limitations in mind yet. By the time we come to preview, we'll have quotas and limits in place to make sure fair use of the solution is in place. But yes, no limitations as just as yet.
Okay, thank you. Another one around. Uh, so will there be a solution for apps which generate reports that take longer than 5 seconds?
Yeah, yeah, and does the single statement mean that we cannot do batch insert? Interesting. Good questions. Yes, so we are considering how we can run longer running queries, right? And there are a couple of ways to sort of reason about it, but it's definitely on the horizon for us. Um, Even in terms of batch insert, we have our API right now that support batch inserts. The trick for us is to understand how we can do We currently limit it to about 5 statements. I would love to understand from you if that is enough. If you want to do batch statements, if you want to do more, what that would look like. Fundamentally, I'd love to understand these use cases before we go and build this out. Um, we may look at alternate ways of rate limiting to support queries that take longer than 5 seconds, but we don't have anything in place right now.
Okay, thanks. You have really interesting questions, Sasha. So I hope I pronounced your name correctly. But I'd like to take a quick pause from the Q&A, and then I'm gonna drop the links in the chat if in case you want to ask more questions. So my recommendation is you join the EAP by registering on the link I just posted. And then there's a group wherein you can drop your follow-up questions. Okay, moving on to the next one. So it's about when you demoed the migrations
Yeah.
use case. So how do we recover from failed migrations, for example?
Yeah, I'm going to take that in the next question after together, which is when the migration will be run right after deployment completed or during the deployment, right? So the pattern that we are following is what we follow in the industry as a standard, which is database migrations will run asynchronously after a deployment, right? So it's not tied to the success of your deployment. And the reason is some apps may have one installation, some can have 10, some can have hundreds, some can have thousands, right? So we do not want migrations to run synchronously in some cases. So it'll be done after the deployment. Um, and recovery from failed migration is interesting because what we have seen in our experience is there are cases when if you have a migration which has failed. If it's because of bad syntax, we recommend, have going through the dev staging workflow to sort of catch some of these errors up ahead of time, right? Obviously, that's something which I'm sure everyone would do. But also in terms of migrations themselves, if it fails because, say, for example, our database service may not be accessible or there's a network blip that happens in the way, typically we will support ways of retrying some of these migrations, either on a schedule or some other mechanism in the future. I'd love to understand some additional use cases and work on some early designs that we have with some of you folks who want to who are interested in how we can run our migrations, right? But there are plans where generally we've currently our thinking is to retries to run some of these migrations and also the migrations themselves, right? Like if you for example, if you try to expand the width of a column or you change the type of a column, so we recommend not doing some of those things, or rather being a bit more relaxed with some of the constraints that you may put in. For example, if you try to sort of like convert a column from say 255 varchar to 100 varchar, it may fail for some instances, right? So if data already exists, so I'd love to understand how we can surface some of that information. We have plans on how we can surface that information and how we can retry running some of these failed migrations as well.
Okay, thanks. Before I go to the next question in the chat, by any chance, let's give way to, do we have any live questions? Anyone prefer to ask it live? Don't worry, this is a safe space. Yeah. Okay, I guess I'll move on to the next question on the list. So in Forge, we have limitation to run apps based on the number of application users. So will Forge SQL also follow the same? Um,
I'm not sure what that means.
yeah, Parthiban, can you clarify what you meant with limitation to run the apps based on the number of app users?
Uh, can you hear me right?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay. So in Forge right now, I saw like the documentation like Forge can run in the background based on the number of users licensed to that. So does that also impact here when we build application on top of this?
any Forge platform limitations that we have, which are not storage related in terms of licensing, apps, invocations, all of those would apply. We are not doing anything in SQL to change any of those platform limitations or platform constraints that are there.
Okay.
Okay. The next one, I'm not sure if this has been answered already, but are transactions across multiple tables supported? For example, using multiple statements.
Yes, currently it's a single statement. So every transaction is an auto commit that we have. We don't allow dirty reads by default. You're free to choose your own isolation level beyond that. But fundamentally, what we have is we have an experimental API that we are trying out in terms of a batch API. We'd love to get, and that can support. You can start a transaction across multiple tables in that. You can add like currently, I think we have limited it to 5 statements. We'd love to understand these use cases to see if that is enough, or if you need more, what your use cases are, whether there are alternatives around it, and to help support these use cases.
Okay, thank you. This one's an interesting one from Martin. So the question goes, will we be able to use this feature and the SDK from Forge Remote as well? Martin, do you mind, if it's fine, can you share which specific use case you're thinking and which scenario you're thinking to come up with this question?
Oh, yes. Hi. Yeah, actually, my question regards to the use case when you need to use Forge Remote for any reason. So like initiating cross product APIs or API calls or something like that, and you have the possibility to access Forge Remote Forge storage as well. So the key value storage. So and will it be able to use this Forge SQL feature as well from there, or is it limited to the resolver, the normal resolver scenario only?
Yeah.
So that's my question basically.
Thank you for asking a question. Like, currently it's limited to the Forge backend SDK, right? We have plans for remote support pending a few product decisions that we need to make, but there are plans for it. But right now it's limited to Forge native apps right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks for the question. Okay, we're nearing towards the end. I only have two here. Checking the time. Okay, I think you still have time, Varun, to answer this too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So one, is there a plan to enable queries to native tables like Jira
Yeah.
issues? Yeah.
Because one thing, some of our some we have a separate database altogether compared to where Jira would be, right? So it's a completely different system altogether. So we will not be allowing direct SQL access to any of our product databases. So if the recommendation, if you want to talk to a product databases, is to always go via the API, right? But no direct DB access will be provided to product databases.
Yep. Thanks. And the last one on my list is how should we handle discontinuing the use of table from a previous app installation after making changes to the data structure?
Yeah. So are you talking about dropping a table that's no longer used by the app?
Farhan, are you by any chance are you still in the call?
Yes, I'm still here. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was my question.
Yeah. So if you're sure that if your app code does not use it for the current installation, you can run a migration to drop a table. The recommendation is obviously when you need to factor in for when apps are upgraded from a previous major version to the current major version, app code should, if there's any data migration that needs to be done, you may have to do that before dropping the table. But a drop table would be a similar migration that you build. Andy
I
and
hope that
Sab, I see that you have questions on the EAP. I remember adding Bitvoodoo and a couple of other apps. We have about 29 or 31 apps in the EAP. We will follow up and get back to you. Ian, is it possible to collect some information after the call? Then we can sort of follow this up asynchronously.
Yep, I'm capturing the names of those.
Thank you.
Yep. I think those are all the questions that we have. Any live questions that you wanna raise? Going once, twice?
I've got a question, but it's not about
Okay.
Forge. It's about the Jira or the Atlassian API. I don't know if you know much about it, but when I query the API to get users, for most users, I get the email address, but for a few, I don't get an email address. But if you go to the user interface, obviously the email address is in there. And it's not visible. I've tried all different properties, APIs, everything to try and find the email address. The reason for it is that because the Jira permissions are very open, I need to restrict access to projects by email address because we have external companies who use our spaces and projects, but we limit them to what they can see. Now,
Okay, I'll try. Yeah.
beyond the scope of this, but
Yeah, but I'll try to take that one, Jason. So normally, a user can opt to choose not to share their email address. So I think that's
okay,
one possibility that you're facing. So if the user would like to share their email address, then you can see those. If not, then yeah, the
all right,
current scenario you're facing is the expected behavior.
okay. So I have to make sure they share their email address.
Yep.
All right, cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, no worries.
Is that in the profile?
Yeah, you have to do it in the UI. Yep, yep,
Yep. Okay. Cheers. Thank you.
yep. You're welcome. And with that, I think we're done. So thanks, Varun, for sharing your expertise with the team. Again, if you want
Just
to,
one quick
oh,
thing, Ryan. So
okay,
we recently released, like less than a month ago, the ability from Forge apps to have access to the user emails. I've shared the change log ticket here. So, like, yeah, nothing changed if you're using the REST APIs, but if you're using the Forge app, you will have access to the user emails. And in comparison to the Connect apps, there is no process to do that. There is no approval required.
okay. Thanks for that, Katerina. So Jason, maybe you'd like to check it out, the link provided, and
Cool.
let's see if
Thank
that
you.
helps your use case.
Yeah, it's just I've got to lock it down for. We've got a lot of what do you call it? They haven't signed NDAs, so we can't give them access to the Jira projects or spaces. That's why, yeah, got to limit it to specific groups. And if they,
Yeah.
I've got basically doing a search for users who aren't in the general groups to make sure, yeah, they can't see access, can't get access to the everything else. I'll try that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Also,
So
a
thanks
couple
again.
quick,
Oh,
quick
sorry,
things.
go on.
And so, look, we are making a lot of significant improvements. Obviously, SQL is something we are starting. We are improving the performance and adding a lot of functionality to our key value store offering as well. We view these two offerings as complementary, and both are evolving rapidly. So, we thank you for your for using Forge and sort of giving us your valuable feedback. But please do expect to see a lot more changes coming in with our storage offerings, right? And like I said, I've shared a couple of links on the EAP sign up form and the documentation. The best way to help us shape the offering is by joining our EAP. I know there are 3 people mentioned that they have not been signed up yet. We will follow up on it, but for others who may be interested in just trying it out, seeing what the use case fits are, to see if our limits and quotas that we are thinking of is in the right way, or if you want to give us any gentle feedback about the SQL offering, we'd love to hear from you.